Good evening, everyone. I hope we've had a wonderful day full of great things and not a lot of stress. We're closing in on the weekend because it is Wednesday, so we're halfway there. I'm really excited to be here this evening. We're going to be talking to David Grinnell, our Curious Corvid, who has a book coming out this Friday. His book is titled Ashes, and it is a Gothic novel, his debut novel, our debut novel, and we're really excited to be here and to be talking about it. So, welcome, everybody. David should be here any second, and we can start talking about his wonderful book. So, hello, everyone. Here we go. Here we go.
All right,
Hi,
here we go.
David.
Hello,
How are
how are
you?
you, Raven? I'm good.
Good.
Exciting.
Are you so
Yes,
excited to talk about your book?
I am. It's been a long journey.
Well, I hope that you're relaxed, that you have a drink, that you're ready to go because we are going to be here a while because we have a lot of really interesting questions for you to work through.
Yes, lots of room for discussion, so I'm very excited.
Yes, oh
So,
my. Um, we're going to start out with all of the questions that people asked on Instagram. So when we announced our interview with David, we did a book giveaway in that if you commented a question and asked David a question about his book, his process, about him, whatever it is that you wanted to know, we would enter you into a raffle to win a copy of his book. So now the time has come, so we're going to go through those questions and get right into it. So
we're ready.
our first question is from Spilling Grace, which I think she just popped in, so that's super exciting. Hello to all the new people who've come in. Thank you. Um,
Yes. Hi, Grace. Hi, Ray.
so,
I think, yep,
all right.
go ahead.
First question is, does the author use the Gothic lens to explore transgressive themes in this book?
So, I would say unintentionally. I actually had to really think about transgressive themes because I'm like, that's vague. But then I realized, oh, it's an actual literary term. So I got really excited about it. It doesn't surprise me that I would unintentionally use transgressive themes because a lot of your early Gothic works are influenced by transgressive themes, ones that are like strictly taboo. So, like, for example, I like to come up with is like Carmilla with the theme of like lesbianism in like Victorian times. So
Yeah.
back then it was taboo. So it doesn't surprise me like I would have themes, so to say, that are transgressive. So a good example, I guess, are the family dynamics between a few of the characters. So like there's a family dynamic between Alice and her father, which deals with a lot of like isolation, being alone, and seclusion. There's not really much of a relationship there. And then there's also the dynamic between a bit later in the book with the Dragomir family and their differences with how they deal with disease and tragedy. So yeah, there's a lot of unintentional themes that are interesting to pick at for sure.
I really appreciate that the first question that we started out with was so academic and literary, too. I would
Yeah,
expect nothing
I,
less from Grace, but oh, her second question is, what was the author's favorite scene to write? This is a great question.
yeah, there's so many good scenes. I guess the one out of all of them is the chapter 4 scene where Alice has this very vivid nightmare and all these like she's walking in the empty part of her house and into her room and she sees this weird like shadowy figure as a little girl and she's terrified of it and then she finds herself on this pink pentagram, and all these countless hands just shroud her, and she feels all these horrible burning sensations like she's being burned alive, which I enjoyed that scene so much because it was based on a real experience I had with a nightmare where I woke up and I'm completely like paralyzed and I couldn't move, which was absolutely terrifying. I was at a house party with a friend and we had a good time partying, and then I had a ex-girlfriend at the time I slept next to, and then when I was sleeping and not even that long in the night, like I had this dream of these like hands like shrouding me, and like it was so painful, and then I wake up and I'm half asleep and awake, and then this light, natural street light, shines into the window, and in the corner I see this like shadowy figure, and it's because also during that time I was not sleeping very well myself. I hadn't slept in like countless days, so I was like really starting to see things, which was dangerous. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that opens up your mind to a lot of different things, doesn't it? When you're a little sleep
Mhm.
deprived.
Yeah, and I told my ex girlfriend about the experience because she was like terrified. I was told her the whole thing, and the look of fear like that triggered. I was like, I gotta write about that because that look of like fear was like I gotta capture that. So
Our next question is from D. Dazia, and it says, "What pushed you to create a Gothic novel?"
um, naturally, I love the Gothic, so there's that. But I felt
That
the
does
Gothic
help.
was a good way. Yeah, I felt the Gothic was a good way to talk about these themes, especially with that being related to another one of those questions, themes about, suicide, death, and I just figured that was what really motivated me, especially coming from a personal experiences I won't get into too much, but it's also a literary technique that I find helpful. It's called roman de clef, which is a lot of authors take real life experiences and put a facade over them in fiction. So it was a good technique I could explore as well as a writer.
Very nice. Effie Gordon writes, "What are your favorite themes to explore?"
Get related. Um, in general, I have really no favorite themes. It just depends on what inspires me and what I end up writing about. So if if it's based on a feeling or a vulnerability, which I think is pretty important, something that's real, tangible, I think it's worth writing about. So my themes are uh, very across the spectrum, so to say. I started writing when I was like a kid, so I would write, romance, whatever, loss and like heartbreak. I would write about happy, more positive things. So it wasn't always death and despair, but it's just whatever is in that moment.
Yes, very good. Um, okay, so moving on, our next question is from Jennifer Gordon Poetry, and she just popped in. So, Jen, you're just in time for your question.
Oh, what are the
She says,
coincidences?
I know. She says, "So exciting. I'd like to know his favorite, most enjoyable part of the publishing process."
That is a really hard question for me because I enjoy every moment of it. And in school, I took editing and publishing, so it was exciting to see some of these ideas and concepts come into fruition. But what I really enjoy most about the publishing experience are the connections I have with people and the publisher and the people that are part of that community. Like, I really think that's the best thing in the world is the networking and the friendships you make in it. So I think that's the best part.
That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. It makes my little Corbett heart happy. Maury underscore bookstagram wants to know, what was your inspiration for the novel?
Oh, so this novel took me like 4 years to write, very long time. What drew my very first inspiration was actually the prologue scene, which I was getting ready for school, and as I was getting ready to leave the door, my mom opens up her bedroom door, and she looks like pale as a white sheet, And I'm like, Mom, are you okay? And she's like, no, I had a really bad nightmare. I'm like, oh, what was it about? And she told me about this dream that she had. There's this old, like, Victorian house in her neighborhood where she grew up. And her brother and her would, dare each other to go in the house or explore it. And she dreamt about the house, and she was walking in the house, and she was walking up in the attic. And in the attic, she saw all her family relatives who had passed. And in the center was her grandfather. And he took out his hand and said, "May you take this dance." So she naturally starts dancing with him. And while this happens, she sees all her other family relatives around her, and her grandfather said, "Don't look at them," for some reason. She didn't quite understand why. And as it was happening, she turns back around to her grandfather, and he crumples right into ashes right in front of her face. And then all her family relatives in that dream wither into ash. So I really thought about that. I'm like, that is disturbing or interesting. And like,
Definitely
I
disturbing.
And then like I meditated on it, and then I just like I need to sit down and write about this. And that whole prologue section I wrote instantly, and I'm like, I have something here. And so I just kind of went from there.
That's awesome. I love things that are inspired by our dreams. Like, I myself have a lot of
Mhm.
really crazy dreams, and I find myself very inspired by them, even if they're like horrible. And so I think it's just a very interesting look into our psyche and into our subconscious, maybe like even who we
Yeah,
really are underneath the surface.
yeah. A lot of Alice's dreams are dreams and nightmares that I've had, and I keep wondering to this day, what is my subconscious trying to tell me here? But at the same time, no matter how horrific they are, I'm like, this is good writing material, and I just jot it down on a
This is
journal.
writing material. Yeah. I kind of am partial to Carl Jung's theory on dreams, and that they are basically the holes of ourselves, things that we're missing or lacking or feel incomplete of, that we haven't quite come to terms with yet.
Yeah.
All right. Coyote underscore Colt underscore 50 says, why did you pick Bedford, Ohio to be the place of destination? And do you plan to release a sequel if it calls for it to tie up any loose ends that the book may have?
So, the general rule of thumb is write what you know. And as far as setting goes, I really thought about it like, where do I want to take this? And I've traveled a lot, so anywhere I go, I always take a journal with me and write down everything. This includes like travel narratives I've written over the years. And I felt with the theme of what I had from the prologue, I was like, this sounds deep and personal. So what place is deep and personal? Well, obviously the place I grew up in. So I'm like, why not write about that? That'd be kind of different, and it's a place I already know. So that's how that inspiration came to be. And as far as a sequel, um, I won't spoil anything, but the way how the novel ends, I feel like I've kind of like wrapped up everything in a little pretty bow, and I got the message across what I needed to, depending on how that reader interprets it. And I feel like I think that story is done. I think that's just unique as it is and doesn't need like a sequel.
Let's see. The cat matey says, no, the capped matey. That's what it says. Sorry. They ask, congrats on getting your first novel published. Do any of the characters in this novel symbolize a real life relationship? So I hear you're in a band. How does having outlets for expression affect your writing? And what's the airspeed velocity of an unmaiden swallow?
Oh, that's from the Mighty Python. No, Holy Grail. There's a bridge scene where the bridge guy asks the question, about the unladen swallow. And of course, my answer to that question, since it's an actual question, is, what do you mean, Captain? Like, do you mean an African swallow or a European swallow? And that's the answer to that question. um, as far as relationship, what I like to do with my characters is I like to blend them with people I know, but I like to mix up their personalities to mold one unique organic character. I feel like that's a way to make them real.
Mhm.
And so, sure, there are some things from a wide spectrum of relationships I have been in the past that are present in the novel, but I felt like portraying those are a good way to show growth. And of course, a lot of relationship experiences in general, a lot of people go through the same thing. So if they see that and they're like, hey, I've had that happen to me before, or this sounds similar to this kind of situation, I relate to this, like that's a good thing. And so that's why my number one thing with writing is vulnerability. That's what I try to strive on because it's what's real. So,
That's very true. That is very true. I think that that is what makes a lasting impression with what you read, is that vulnerability and how it resonates with your own. Anne Goodreads says, it's using her last name Reaper, foreshadowing what actions she'll take in the book.
I love this question. So when I first started writing Alice, I had no idea. All I knew was from that prologue, okay, I'm writing about death. Okay, well, death. Okay, Reaper. Well, let's just go with that. And then it just kind of, last thing kind of fit. But as I started writing, I didn't realize what possibilities I could have with foreshadowing with her last name.
Yes.
So the answer to that is just depends on the interpretation of the reader. But my personal interpretation, which I think is a positive theme in the book, is transformation, which relates to um, what I like about tarot cards with like the card of death is about transformation. So
Yes.
that was unintentional.
That's kind of really cool, though, how that worked out. Um,
Yeah.
yes. So I think that wraps up all of our Instagram. I was just scrolling through and making sure I didn't miss anybody. But that wraps up our Instagram questions. So we're going to move on to the questions from me.
Whew. All
Are
right.
you ready? You need a breather. You got this. You got this.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Okay. So, in your novel, we are introduced to Alice
Mhm.
Reaper, a haunted young woman trying to move forward with her life after a terrible tragedy. And as we follow her through the book, she feels very real and she's very emotionally accessible. She's very relatable. What goes into creating an emotionally real character? And how long did it take for you to really flesh out Alice and bring her together?
Um, I really didn't finish fleshing her out, so to say, until actually this year. And it was a few months before I submitted to Curious Corvid. So um, I started writing her about 4 years, so 2017. So it was a lot of putting together, especially with that time period, all the experiences I had since that time period versus this time period. All those experiences kind of helped me like mold Alice even further. Uh, and what was the other part of your question?
um, what goes into creating an emotionally real character?
Yeah. So,
You kind of answered
as
this
I said
already.
before, yeah. So vulnerability, obviously, being real to yourself and being able to, even though it's a scary thing to write about, being forward like that, I think it's makes it much more powerful to write something like that. So vulnerability, yes.
I suppose if you're going to go to the effort of creating a whole character and creating this whole universe, basically, then you might as well put you're all into making it real. Otherwise, what is the point, right?
Yes, yeah. Character growth is just as important as plot is.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Because it doesn't really matter what's happening in the background if you're not really connecting with the character, right? Because that's what we all want when we read. We want to be able to connect and like escape our own reality and kind of immerse ourselves in this one where hopefully everything is going to work out okay. So Alice is heavily influenced by several different bands, including Alice in
Mhm.
Chains, The Civil Wars, and Evanescence. details like this I felt made her feel really just real and relatable, because those are bands that I have listened to myself, but also
Mhm.
made her very current and tangible. Um, what caused you to choose those bands for Alice?
Well, like you, I grew up with those bands. And all those bands, the moment I was introduced to them, there were different stages of my life. So, like Evanescence, I discovered them by watching the corny Daredevil movie with Ben Affleck. Wow. um, but that the Fallen album was just magical, and the Open Door album, and that, like, I don't know, it's just the way that the lyrics overall just like immerse yourself in such a type of like hauntingness and um, something that's very real and tangible. So the themes that that band really talks about in their older music really, I think, relates to Alice as a character. So like there's this one song called Breathe No More, which Amy Lee has a lot of illusions about glass shards and mirrors and looking into yourself. And unintentionally, I wrote about that, but I didn't know I was like, I had those themes also present in my novel, which are related to that song. So when I discovered that, I'm like, okay, I can play with this. And so I uh, decided with that. And then with the Civil Wars, I was introduced to them to high school. And high school was a really rough time because my grandmother just passed away, and my parents had a risk with foreclosure with the house, and the recession happened during that time. So we had like no money, no nothing. And I'm the only child, so it's not like I had anyone to really talk to. So I felt really isolated, and I contemplated a lot with such dark themes like suicide. And that band really saved me with how the lyrics, the voices, how the music just kind of like spoke that tormentedness I felt at that time. So um, I really felt like I could incorporate those feelings into Alice as well. And what's great is the Civil Wars, their sound is like very Southern, kind of like Americano. So that gave me the inspiration to actually put her past in the South, American South, Virginia, which also touches on another subgenre of the Gothic called the Southern Gothic. But I used the Southern Gothic as a way of more postmodernism approach instead of the actual Southern Gothic, because actual Southern Gothic uses like Civil War time periods and stuff. But I decided to use elements of the Southern Gothic, such as like the house, uh, how dark and lonely it is, and just the themes that she goes through, along with her dreams that are part of that house. With like, there's this scene where she dreams about her own house, but she's not sure if it's her house, and it's all rotted and decayed. And that rottenness and decay is not only part of the Gothic, but it's Southern Gothic because that house is from the South as well. So it
Yes.
was neat how I fused those. Um, and then the last band, Alice in Chains, I'd known they existed all the time, but I really didn't start listening to them until last year, honestly, during COVID. And that darkness, like, of their lyrics with, you know, depression, even drugs, and suicide, it really spoke to me in a way that um, it's something I needed, like, to listen to. And And the fact that their name is Alice in Chains, I had to look into that because I'm like, oh, here I have a character named Alice, but that's not the reason why I came up with her name. Um, but it's interesting how that band came up with their name because they were influenced by Alice in Wonderland, and of course, Alice is my character. Alice is influenced by Alice in Wonderland a little bit, especially with the dreams.
Yeah.
So, and I also like the interpretation of um, with Alice in Chains as like female bondage. And there's a moment in the novel where um, her love interest Vivian is wearing a Alice in Chains T-shirt, and that in itself reflects makes her think of herself as like, oh, I feel like an Alice in Chains. So I thought that was kind of a cool connection to put together. So
I really
yeah,
liked that moment in the book. Like I loved just how you were able to just tie it all together. There was
yeah,
and we've had conversations about this, but I was just blown away by how much thought and care you put into creating Alice, because she was just, I was interested and captivated by her just right away. And there are some books that I've read where you kind of have to like really lean into it. And yeah, it's a great book, but you don't necessarily identify with the character or whatever. But
yeah,
with Alice, it was just like I kind of felt like I was reading a little piece of myself when I was reading through
yeah.
her whole story and watching her growth and her transformation and everything. And it was just there's so many heavy themes in the book, but I ultimately
Oh,
felt because you handled it in such a careful way, it felt real, but it also felt very hopeful. Like when it was all said and
yeah,
done, it's still very hopeful and I think part of that comes by allowing those things to exist, which we so
yeah.
often don't do in our day-to-day lives, you
Well,
know.
yeah. I mean, those themes, a lot of people just don't talk about them openly, and there's so many people that just don't talk about death or suicide or how they deal with it because it's a grieving pain, and people grieve in pain differently, and that's a very difficult thing to talk about. So, as I was writing this book, I was like, it would be kind of cool to write this book and give a voice to those that don't know how to talk about those things or struggle with those that kind of darkness. So I really hope I portrayed that well with through Alice's perspective.
Well, since we're on this subject, I'm actually going to skip to ahead to one of my other questions, since we're kind of in this
Okay.
anyway. And it is, we're talking about these heavy themes. We have mental health issues, including grief, suicide, PTSD. A lot of different things are going on with Alice and with other characters in the book. Um, did did you find it difficult to write through these themes? Did you find it like therapeutic?
A bit of both. Therapeutic in my own sense because a lot of these themes I was struggling with and have been struggling with my whole life, and yet I felt like I had no voice to talk about those things in a safe environment so through writing I was able to talk about those themes. So it was very liberating. Like I felt like this is a story, I have a story to tell, and this is it. So that's a good thing. And of course, as you're writing these things, you're like, man, this is a lot. Should I really phrase it this way? Like, oh, will people connect the work too much to the author itself and not enjoy the fiction? Like, so there's a fine line between that. But I just went with it anyways because I kept saying in my head, as long as it's real, that's what's going to speak more. So I just went with it. So.
Absolutely. So, in keeping with this idea of writing about your personal experiences, do you feel that authors have a responsibility to bring awareness to issues that they have firsthand experience with, either through themselves or a loved one?
Mm, within reason, it just depends on the author. I mean, because everyone's different. Uh, like for me as an author, I think it's important to talk about these themes because if you talk about it and people are more aware of it, then people might take the time to actually reach out. I mean, sure, there's like suicide helpline or whatever, but like sure, that's just talking to someone on the line. It's not like you're able to actually talk to someone or
Yeah,
you know see someone that actually cares about what you're going through. So like writing something like that on a page and bringing it to life to a way where the person can picture it is, I think, a lot more powerful in some ways than just like talking to someone on the end of the line or something. So I think that's that's what's so powerful about literature itself. It's just how the words on the page come to life. So yeah.
absolutely. So moving on, let's get out of the heaviness a little bit. Um, Something that really fascinated me was the introduction of the occult through Viviana, particularly the
Hmm.
tarot card reading. And we have talked
Hmm.
about tarot before and how Alice's card is actually the death card. And I hope you don't mind, I took the liberty of taking the death card out of my own tarot decks to give people kind of an
Sure.
idea of what it might look like. So this is from
Yeah,
my deck, and that's the death card.
that's a nice interpretation. I brought mine out as well,
Of
which
course you did.
yeah, because I was really looking forward to this question, by the way, which is the Death Tarot card. I didn't start to get into tarot cards until last year because of COVID, and I needed something to do. And being in seclusion all the time, there wasn't really that many people I could talk to. So, on a personal level and face to face. And so I was like, oh, just get into a new hobby. And I found these, tarot cards kind of like therapeutic in a way because I love literature so much and my literature mind loves interpretations.
Yeah.
So why not apply the same thing to tarot cards, which in the moment in the book, there's a moment where Viviana's brother, Ionel, talks about interpretation of tarot cards and how they're related to literature, which I think is it's brilliant. So for people watching, this is my death version of the card, which I found pretty amazing because it's not like there's moments in the book where this is very relatable um, because death is about transformation, which ended up being a really main powerful theme ended up talking about in the book as I was writing. And some of the dreams even are like with transformation and death. Um, Such dreams as one thing is she dreams about this woman in the water and she sees this woman and it's a woman in a death-like sleep and this woman's eyes jolt open. It's kind of vampiric in the sense, and it's funny that this is vampiric in a sense because it's talking about that eternal sleep, as you can see how the woman's arms are crossed. So looking at that, I'm like, I didn't know I was applying themes to that kind of card. It's unintentionally happened, and that I think that's pretty cool.
I think that is amazing. I think that that's just more proof of it was just meant to be.
Yeah, yeah, it really was, and so yeah, I just blew my mind because after I wrote that scene and after writing the novel, I took the liberty of analyzing my own novel, which is how I was able to come up with all those notes that I sent you. And I thought, wow, these notes would be helpful. So it really opened up my head about this character and the connections I unintentionally made. So yeah.
I loved it, and I just obviously I love Alice. I'm just gonna fangirl here for a moment. I loved her and I connected with her, and I was like low key super excited to find out that we shared the same birthday card.
Yeah, yeah, I unintentionally made her birthday November 1st, which if you're interested in signs and all that kind of stuff, the death card runs from like very late October all the way through November 1st. And when I read that, I was like, "Oh wow, that's creepy." That like I didn't see that coming. I just figured, "Oh yeah, I'll have her, her birthday on that day." And also with her dealing with transformation, especially the unintentional of like with her last name, death, haha. But also around her birthday is this same event of when her tragedy happens, and more than one tragedy happens on that day too. So it's kind of that recurring theme. So it's interesting to explore for sure.
It is. And she's a Scorpio and it's Scorpio season. So it's perfect timing for your book to be coming out because it's in her season. And two, she shares very Scorpio type characteristics. She's very secretive and she's mysterious, but she's very passionate, and what she loves with like a very, very big intensity. And I loved that, and I loved it that I just love how you created her. I just think she's just so real, and just I would like want to be her friend. So one of my favorite quotes from your book, and I went through and
Yes,
we picked out quotes, and it was
it took
really,
us forever.
it was so hard to do because you have a really wonderful ability of putting so much emotion into a few lines, and so much thought into just a few lines. And so it was so hard to pick some
Plus, I challenged you. Okay, pick your top 3 or 5, and
yeah, I
you're
know.
like, "What?"
I had way too many. But one of my absolute favorites, like in my top three, was books are the souls of the people who wrote them and the hearts of the people who read them. I just love that so much. There's so much depth to that statement. So, in keeping with that theme, what
Yeah.
parts of the soul do you hope to touch with Ashes?
So I kind of stumbled upon that answer a little bit with how I wanted to give a voice to people that can't express themselves dealing with these kind of things. And so I hope that, as this work goes out, that whether you just enjoy Gothic literature or, you want to find something you can relate to and you can't find words to describe it or find the emotion to feel for it, I hope that when you pick up this book that, you'll feel like this is what I needed. This is a different perspective. Like, this is so enlightening. Like, there's very few books in my lifetime that I've read, even from an academic standpoint, about a book that really just makes you go, wow, like, and you have no other words for it. And that book for me, of course, was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Like, after I read it, I was just like, wow. And then, like, every time I would reread it, obviously, because I'm working on it as my thesis, I always find something new about it. And I've read it like 3 times, and it's like, oh, I didn't see that before, or I didn't think of it like that. So I hope, like, when people pick up this book, they see something in it that they didn't see before, and they have a reason to revisit it. So
I'm really excited to have a physical copy of it. So I'm just picturing, okay, so it's the fall, right? The leaves are falling from the trees. I'm gonna pick
mhm.
like kind of a moody, rainy day where the rain is just coming down and it's a little misty outside with a hot steaming cup of tea, and I'm gonna sit in my chair by the window with my little Afghan and my hot cup of tea with your book, because I feel like that's just the perfect aesthetic and ambiance for it to just
Yeah.
really absorb it. Maybe have some candles going also. So I'm very
I
excited to have
saw
a
the
tangible
background there. I'm
copy
like,
of
how appropriate.
it. Yeah, I had two. I have my picture and then I have my little buddy here.
It's his name Yorick, by the
It
way.
is actually. I was gonna go
Oh,
with Steve, but I thought that'd be a little cliche.
from Hamlet. No, it's not.
So last question. Besides being a novelist, which congratulations, debut novel, like how does that feel to call yourself a novelist?
Whew. Uh, Liberating, I guess. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I've always written stories, and I've always come close to writing a full-length novel, but the most I've ever written was like a novella. And I've never able to reach the novel length, but this is the first one I actually reached that novel length because, industry standards have their standard of how many words make a novel or a novella. So, as soon as I finished that last scene, I was like, it's over 64,000 words. Like, wow. And I felt so much like accomplishment in that after
Yeah,
I finished
it is a
writing
huge
the last word.
accomplishment. I feel like
Yeah.
there are a lot of people that set out to write big works, but they don't ever actually finish. So just finishing in and of itself is a
Yeah.
huge thing.
Um, I remember when this story was a short story first, and I took it to a creative writing workshop for my undergrad because I had fiction workshop. And people read this, and I only had bits and pieces of it. I really did. Like, I only had the uh, prologue. I had bits of chapter 1, and I had bits of chapter 5, which was really strange.
That is interesting.
And yeah, and people read this, and when I'm in writing workshop, you have to sit there and be quiet. You're not allowed to say anything. So whatever criticism there is, you just have to sit there and take it. But that was the ordeal because that would help you, understand, like, you need to sit and be quiet and listen to these people critic because that's how the writing world really works.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I really appreciated that. But, all these insights that people were giving me, they're like, I really relate to this story, and like this should become a novel, not a short story. And like they're like, we love the idea with the fire ashes shards. You should explore that more. And they're like, you should add more about, the thing that they had trouble with was between the flashbacks and the memories. And they're like, if you do this and that, like I really see this becoming something more. So um, I went with it. I continued with it. And there's this one friend that I'm friends with, and he was there in that workshop, and I let him read the first draft. He's like, wow, you've come a long way since I've last read this, like in 2019. He's like, I would never have the temperament or the discipline to just sit there and write all of this. And he's like, and I like how with the writing, like it's so realistic. Like you didn't have to, like a lot of writers try really hard and trying to express something where it might be a little like um, I don't know what the right word is for it, but it's like not like, oh well, I can see the author's trying really hard to put this a point, but he's like, you made it in such a way like it's clear and it's like it's more real. So I really appreciated that comment from him because he saw it from like when it was a short story to this full-length novel. So
Yeah, that is super cool. That's nice when you have people that are following you, like from the very beginning to the end, because then you have someone to appreciate it with you. Because
yeah,
normally you're the only one who really sees everything that goes into it from start to finish. So,
yeah,
when you have it all done, people are like, wow, look at you. Like, oh, that must have been like easy peasy. And you're like, no,
yeah.
actually, no. Part of me
No,
died for like 3 things.
I actually had pieces of it way before way before I started actually writing the prologue because I had all these short stories and they're short stories I just stuff in the archives and don't know what to do with them. And there's this one moment in the book where the narrative switches a little bit to give a background story of Viviana's past with her past relationship with this guy named Oscar. And that section was actually an old, like, short story I wrote way back in like 2014. And it just kind of sat there and I called it Dark Lilac, but I didn't know what to do with it. And then, because the thing I had about that, I'm like, well, what should his love interest be? And I couldn't come up with the name for it. And then once I came up with the character Viviana, I was like, I could connect these two things together. Oh, it would be really great. And then it just kind of like fit together. And I was like, that is so cool. So yeah, my good advice is no matter what you write, just save it and just keep it there. And you never know when you have to go back to it and reuse it for something better. So
That is good
yeah.
advice. So, you also, besides being a novelist now, you're also a poet. So, where does
Hmm.
poetry fall in your writing? Like, for some people, poetry is the first thing that they write. And so it's like their first love in the literary writing
Hmm.
world. So, how does that fall for you in terms of poetry?
Poetry was something I didn't really get. I mean, I always liked poetry, but I didn't really get into it until like I was going through my undergraduate year. And that's because for undergrad we had to take um, poetry classes, and I took a lot of like introduction to poetry, and there's advanced literature courses and American literature courses that had poetry. And I really had to learn like scansion, which is like breaking apart the lines and find out what's stressed and unstressed and what that means with like why is this word stressed really hard? Well, it's hinting to something what the poet is saying, or why is that line jammed and this line here it has a series of commas. Well, okay, these series of commas want to capture whatever this person is observing in slow motion, the beauty of something or whatever. So I really didn't start getting appreciation for poetry until I learned like poetic tools and techniques. I'm like, this is really cool. And then I've learned like the simple like Shakespeare sonnet or the Spenserian Spencer and stanza, which if you read Fairy Queen is killer to get through. um, and of course, there's Chaucer's Rhyme Royale. So those were I started off with, and then once I got into Romantic Poets, it was like Ottava Rima, which is a different kind of rhyme scheme. And I'm like, I really want to play with these. Like these are so cool. These are awesome like forms, and so I started playing with them. And there was a buddy of mine who went to the same school with me, and him and I just nerd out about literature and poetry all the time. And he's the one that like encouraged me. He's like, I've read some of your poetry. You should really continue with this. I was like, all right, sure. And I just started writing. And then he's like, I'll help you write an introduction and we'll get it out. This should really come out. So I self-published first edition of, Phases of Love's Moon. And funny enough, that book led to Curious Corvid, because once I self-published it, I get all these ads and logarithms on like publishing stuff. And it so happens, like one of those advertisements was Curious Corvid. And I saw Curious Corvid and I was like, oh, a raven. That is so tempting. And I just had to like click on the logo. And then, the rest is history. So in a way, that book, that trying to self-publish just to test water how the publishing world is, was very rewarding. And so as far as future projects go, I really hope to have a second edition of Phases of Love's Moon, because ever since I've been signed on to the CCP, like I've had this rush of inspiration, and it hasn't been slowing down. And it's really bad, but good in a way, because I'm just like constantly writing all the time now. And I have all these poetry now. I'm trying to make it to 100, kind of like Shakespeare's sonnets, like 100 poetries. And I'm at like, the original collection had like 60 poems, but now I'm at like 75. So I'm trying really hard to like get to 100. And so there's that project I hope to expand more and re-release, and maybe have my friend who inspired me and who wrote the introduction to write an extended version of it, and then maybe I can write a preface to it about why it's important and the themes that really talk about self-love, love and relationships. I mean, love of all kind of forms, and I think that's very powerful, especially with the themes about phases of the moon, because the moon changes constantly like we do, and how we look at ourselves or how we reflect love. So I think that's important to expand more. So I have that. So there'll definitely be more poetry. As for more novels, yes. Same kind of similar story that happened with Ashes is I had this short story in creative writing. It was my very first horror short story, my very first one. And when people read this, I mixed it up with like historical fiction, antiquarian horror, and gothic romance, which is very unique. But if you like stories like M.R. James, that's pretty much closely what it's related to. But I remember taking this story to this workshop, and people were arguing and debating over what this entity is in the book that I portrayed. They couldn't tell whether it was a ghost or a vampire, and I had evidence to support both, but I played with the ambiguity of that. So I'm really looking forward to hash that out more. And I've had other people read it just for fun. They're like, you need to expand this into like a novel or something, because you left details that could be expanded even more. You have strong background characters that could be like really expanded on. So I've been working on that, and I've just had a big rush of like inspiration for it, and I'm already at like 30,000 words. Yeah, so there's that. And I'm running with ideas with like titles and stuff, which I know I'll come up with later. And then I also I love playwriting as well. So in school I took a lot of playwriting, and there's this dark play that I wrote that's based off of a course I took, an independent study called Writing the Dark Comedy. So I read like a lot of Edward Albee, like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and stuff like that. And I tried to use those themes of like dark comedy, but instead of writing something really funny, I just wrote something really dark. But it's so unique in the sense that it takes place in the 1920s America, and it's just has all these supernatural themes and dark themes like Ashes that deal with suicide, death. So I'm very excited about it. I have that finished, but it's sitting there. So I'm
I'm gonna have to read
curious of what
that.
I could do. Okay,
I read
very
play
well.
when
I
I was
mean,
in college, and I loved the process of it. I it was for a creative writing class, and we had us do like a whole bunch of different stuff, and I we got to write a play, and I just loved it so much. Unfortunately, mine was like super dark, and it was about this boy who was contemplating suicide, and then at the end of the play, you don't know whether or not he went through with it.
mhm,
So it's just really sad,
mhm.
and it made all of my classmates really uncomfortable. But
Yeah, yeah.
but
My
anybody
play.
who can do that, oh, I just love it so much. I love reading plays.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we should maybe look into like how the playwriting market is. That would be kind of a unique twist on
It
for
certainly
Curious
would.
Code to branch out. See, even Grace is like, yes,
Yeah,
let's do
she's
it.
freaking out
Okay.
down there. Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
exciting. Oh my gosh. Well, I have really, really loved talking about your book, about you, about your future projects and everything that we have going on. I have to say, David, I I have really enjoyed working with you through the whole process. You've been so lovely and patient and understanding, and I love um, your creativity and your intelligence and your ability to be so diplomatic and nice about it. So I've had my share of run-ins with academics who are not nice.
Snobby.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I've
so
had
I'm
no
always a
experience with
little
that.
bit intimidated when I start working with an academic or someone who is much more literary than I am. But you've been an
Oh yeah.
absolute joy to work with, and I'm so
Oh, thank you.
proud of you in the short time that I have known you. I'm proud of the work you put into your book, the vulnerability that is in it, and I'm really very honored and proud to be the publisher for your debut novel. So I am just so excited for you and all of the great things that I know that are going to come. And now is the time where we get to tell everybody that your book is available for pre-order officially.
Yes, finally. Yes, officially. So, any of you are interested in a hard signed copy, we'll get those out shortly. Just go to Curious Corvid website and place your pre-orders, and yeah, a lot of exciting things.
So much exciting
I
things.
love the artwork. Yes.
So, would you like to draw the winner for your free book?
Of course, yes. So I think you'll appreciate the vessel I decided.
Yes.
It's my old uh, it's my old tip jar I would use for my when I used to play solo, and the old tip jar is called Dave's Nuts.
Oh
But
my God.
yeah, it's just a joke. So here we go. All right, let's see what we have here. Okay, and Goodreads.
Okay. Well, I will reach out to Anne Goodreads and let her know that you want a copy of your book, Ashes.
Sounds
So
great.
that's fantastic. Thank you so much to everybody who watched this evening, who commented and had such a great time. It was so nice to see everybody come out for David and his book, Ashes. Make sure that you give Dave a little like and a little follow over there so you can follow all of his upcoming works, all of his projects, everything that he has going on. His music, he has music posted on his page, and it's amazing, and I love it. I listen to it
Yes.
obsessively.
Yes, my band posted made a music video. What was it? Last year, and it's a werewolf themed song called Bad Fur. So yes, you should check out the band. We also have a Instagram page called Naissance Band. So please follow the band. We would really appreciate it.
And
So yeah,
what would be really cool is if we could get all of the Curious Corvids together and come and see you guys.
yes, we should. Yes.
So
Well,
is there anything else that you would like to say before we close out this evening?
hmm, not really. I don't think there is Oh, Anisha said, "I'd love his band." Well, thank you. um, no, there's not really much. I've enjoyed our conversation and interview, and it's such a joy to talk with you about this work. And I look forward to working with you more and, helping other authors, part of our group, become better writers, because that's my goal is at the end of the day, become a better writer. So the only way to
Yes.
do that and to grow is to review each other's work and then critique it, critical, good feedback. And yeah, I'm a big supporter in that.
You're
So
official.
I'm
You're an
definitely.
official ARC reader too for CCP as well.
Yes, I'm so excited. I can't wait to read those manuscripts and like use what I was taught in school. Like it's amazing, and like being a literary critic that way, it's a dream job for me. So I thank you so much. Like
Of
that really means so
course.
much.
Well, thank you so much, David. Thank you so much, everyone who came to watch this evening. Pre-orders are available for his book on the Curious Corbett website. If you do live outside of the United States, the book will be available on Amazon Kindle and all major bookstores on November 12th. It'll be a slow rollout. Ingram Spark does a staggered rollout so we don't overwhelm, I guess, the world with your greatness. But we'll be seeing you on November 12th, and then after that, it'll start showing up in more and more places all over the world, and I'm so excited to see
Yes.
that for you.
Bookstores. Yes.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get some readings going too in
Yeah.
Ohio since you
Uh,
and I are local. So
yes.
I'm currently working with that. So
We have
I
one
will inform you.
reading scheduled live for, I think, is it next week or the week after?
Yeah, it's next Wednesday.
Yes.
I think that's the 17th. So I'll be reading the prologue and chapter 1 and maybe 2.
And
So
so
we'll
you
see.
could just make sure you're following Dave so you can go onto his um, page and be there for his reading because it's going to be wonderful and super exciting. And it's going to really get you guys excited to buy his book too. It's going to lure you all in one by one. So,
Sounds like a plan. Oh, someone says come to AZ. Well, if that's a cool thing, please send more details on that message, either Garrett Corbin or I, please. More places, the better. So,
yes. All right, everybody. Thank you again so much. Have a wonderful evening. And I hope that you'll consider picking up a copy of David's book. And yeah, keep an eye out. We have a
yeah.
lot more of exciting things coming over the course of the rest of this year. So
Hmm.
David will be talking
All right.
soon.
Yeah.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Have a nice night.